Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade, and I'm so happy to be here today on the Education Show with Holly Korbey from The Bell Ringer. Holly, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is so fun to do and such an exciting time to be talking about what we're talking about, which is the reconsideration, the rebellion, the retreat on educational software, and the coverage of it, which is the particular concern of The Grade. Let me jump in and just ask you to give us a sense of where things are on this reconsideration of digital software.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when I started in education journalism, it was right in the middle of the big tech wave. 2012, 2013, iPads in every classroom. My first real job was working for KQED's Mindshift blog, which was supposed to be about the future of learning, right? And it was all focused on tech and how this technology was going to change everything. So I have been following this promise that technology was really going to give kids a leg up on learning for a while. And now it looks like, especially post-COVID, when I think 98% of American students got their own device to take home, when schools were closed and when schools were in this, hybrid learning. And now we're at this place where parents and teachers and school leaders are all starting to say, okay, we've had enough digital learning. This is too much.
And politicians and celebrities. I think I saw Hugh Grant the other day saying something about this. I was like, when did Hugh Grant become ed tech guy? There really is a surge or a wave. And I know that some people are very excited about it. And I know that some people are very worried about it. Before we dive in, I just want to be clear that ed tech is a broad umbrella term. There are a bunch of things going on, and we're not going to be talking about most of them because we drive ourselves crazy. There's limits on social media at a certain age. Important, we're not going to talk about it. There's cell phone limits, personal cell phone limits in schools. Again, lots of attention on that. Let's focus, if we can, on this key issue of what I'm going to call instructional software. You know this world much better than I do. It's iReady, it's Amplify, it's Zern. Am I saying that correctly?
Yep, Zern.
Is it IXL or IXL?
IXL.
IXL. A world of providers that have come along with the devices and said, hey, we can help teachers and help kids. And yet now here we are and people aren't so sure. So are you okay with me if we focus just on this one part of the rebellion?
Yeah, that would make me a lot more comfortable because that's what some of my reporting has focused on.
Excellent. And I'm going to talk about that. I want to talk about that as well as other people's reporting or lack thereof. Where are we now in terms of instructional software in American classrooms? Is it everywhere? Is it half of everywhere? Where are things now?
I would say that mostly it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And, a lot of my reporting has focused on elementary school. So that's kind of where I am paying attention. Schools are using digital software for assessment to assess kids on their skills for their benchmark assessments. They're also using it for instruction, and they're also using digital platforms for extra practice and practice time.
Right. And how far I know there's a lot of talk and a lot of conversation about rolling things back or reviewing or reconsidering, but how widespread is the rollback right now?
Yeah, that is very unclear because things are happening so quickly. Some states have just introduced legislation or just passed legislation to limit the amount of screen time, period, that elementary school students are using, which I think is really interesting. And then there are more individual cases where there are parent groups going to school boards. There are groups of teachers that are asking the school board, hey, can we discontinue use of some of these digital platforms like iReady?
But most of the time, if I understand correctly, they're not getting down to specific software choices. They're focused on the presence or absence of the device and the amount of time spent on the device. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct. And there's good reason for that. There's been some coverage of, there's been some reporting on parents saying that their kids who aren't allowed to like watch YouTube at home are coming home singing commercial jingles that they're finding from YouTube. So parents have a reason to push back on total screen time because I think they're very unsure how screens are being deployed during the school day in total. And I know this is true because I have teenage sons. So they tell me like, hey, I watched March Madness, today in English class. And I'm saying, well, how is that possible? How is that happening? So I think that the levels of instruction versus maybe not instruction time, depending on your laptop or your iPad is very blurry.
I remember back in my day, a couple of baseball crazed kids figured out ways to get transistor radios with the little wired ear piece into the classroom so that they could listen to a daytime baseball game instead of American history or whatever we're doing. This is just a modern version of that.
That's right. That's right.
And what's your sense of or assessment of the state of the coverage? Not so much the social media discourse or the Substacks or the political commentary, but the actual traditional journalism. Let's go find some facts and see what the trade-offs are. Have the journalists entered the room, or are they still getting out of bed?
That's a really good question. And I mean, in my assessment of it is they're still getting out of bed. I mean, I think that we're missing asking some big questions because of these kind of more sensationalist stories, that are spreading, about kids watching YouTube. Like that's bad. But it's unclear how much that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that in my opinion, there need to be more stories looking at how are students using the digital platforms for learning?
Mm-hmm.
Is it 10 minutes at the end of a math class to get some extra practice on that concept you just learned?
Right.
Or is it providing the main instruction? And I mean, those things are happening. When I reported for Education Next about digital math practice last year, I talked to a math supervisor for a district in Pennsylvania that said when he came in, students were learning. They were doing their main instruction on a digital platform. The platform was teaching them, and he said it was total chaos. So there's no doubt that that is happening, but I want to read more stories about that. I want to see more stories about we are using it for our tier 1 instruction, the main instruction. Well, how are students doing?
Right.
Are changes being made?
Right. There are two things that what you just said make me think of. One is this distinction between central instructional role versus supplemental. And the second is the practice issue. I want to come back to the practice issue. I feel like the journalists I've seen or the outlets I've seen that have been covering the breaking story, the breaking news, are Tyler Kincaid at NBC. He's written a lot about the Los Angeles parents, and Natasha Singer, who's written about a Chromebook rollback in a Kansas middle school and has a story sort of giving an overview of things out there. Are there other folks or other outlets that are covering at least the surge, if not the granular sense of what's going on in the classroom that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, not that I'm familiar with. I'm not saying that it's not happening, but not that I'm familiar with. The stuff that I am more familiar with has been the more, I don't know, I don't even want to use the word sensationalistic because it is happening, but it's more kind of stories about the parent emotions, about the backlash or the teacher emotions.
Right. A couple of weeks ago, there was that parent who wrote a long piece about his kid's experience with iReady, which was a great read if you want to be frustrated, but didn't include the questions of the iReady folks that you would want to know, or didn't include a second set of eyes, and didn't really have a classroom, a firsthand depiction of the classroom because, of course, it was just the parent. I read that and I thought, oh, this is great. I hope it doesn't stop here. I hope we get more than just this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there are just key questions about Are students learning on the digital platforms? And if so, what are they learning? And so he brings up, that parent brought up points that I have heard before in my own reporting. So in that story that at Education Next about digital math practice, parents and teachers and students said some of the same things that he was saying, that this it punishes you, the algorithm punishes you for taking too long to answer a question or for getting the answer wrong by generating more problems. The app itself is hard to use on a laptop. Like these things are real issues. But the missing question is, are students getting better at math? And I think his conclusion was his students are not getting better at math. They're really becoming resistant to using the practice platform. But I would really like to see some more hard numbers, around that.
In your wished for world, if you were the assigning editor for education journalism, who are the outlets or the people that you'd love to see doing these kinds of what's really happening in the classroom with digital learning software stories? Who are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the New York Times could really take this on. I think that they have a big one-to-one laptop program. Take a look at, because I think there are some real nuances here that are important. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a story for MIT Tech Review, which was about learning to read software. And this is really interesting because there are some programs that are doing very well that help teachers a lot. So programs where they can pinpoint which sounds kids are weakest in and which blends they're weakest in. A teacher gets a readout
Right.
of each of those sounds, and then they can go back and target that instruction. So I think that, like, when we're looking at screen time, I want the New York Times to go into New York City classrooms and be like, are you using that good software? Are you using something less good? What is that reading software targeting? Like that's the kind of detail, my obsession is teaching and learning, is that that's what I want to read more of.
Right. The Times could certainly do it. They have the reach and the resources to do it. I'd also love to see, it might be hard to do as a radio story, but I'm sure that the folks at NPR could figure out a way to tell this story an audio format. I don't know that I remember, we're just operating off of our memories here. I don't know if I remember stories from them. And one of my favorite outlets these days, my favorite ed teams these days, the Associated Press, I'm sort of waiting for them to jump in. Again, not to fan the flames or be on the bandwagon, but to sort of give us some information along with the concern and along with the political movement. This thing is happening, right? And people can write about it or not. But the unique role of journalism is that there are people who are trained and paid to go in and give as close to a firsthand understanding without a particular I hate technology or I love technology kind of thing.
I think it's really crucial at this moment that parents get some hardcore information about what is being used, when it's being used, what is the role of the teacher in how it's being used.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that we can do through reporting. In that Education Next story, I found that there are some digital math platforms. One is Delta Math, one is called Assessments, where teachers can create their own problem sets and upload them. And then they can see every student's individual answer. The teachers I talk to who are using that are saying, it's great. It doesn't take me very long to upload. Kids do, I can see who gets it wrong and what I need to reteach. So it's, what I'm worried about is that the stories about the emotions and screen time generally are going to block out maybe some bright spots or some things where technology is really working for students, especially in a limited use. But all that to say, parents need really hardcore information.
Is there an article or a report out there that exists right now that is close as we come to, and feel free to name your own work. Is there an article or a report that gives that kind of information that parents really need right now?
Well, I mean, yes, I hate to do this, but yes, the MIT tech story from a couple of years ago about learning to read on an iPad, I think is really important
Okay.
because I do look into these exact issues of what do apps do? How do teachers use them?
Hmm.
Did the learning move? We look at some reading scores, and then I talk to teachers that they say yes, this app does this and this very well, but I wish it did this.
Right.
We're not using it for that.
Right.
Same, go ahead.
And your 2025 piece in edX, the practice problem, is helpful in part because it reminds us how clunky some of these platforms can be, despite more dollars than I can imagine and more talented people that I can imagine. It's very hard to come up with a platform. It seems like that isn't doesn't have some slowness or clunkiness, and kids are impatient. They've always been impatient, but they're really impatient now, and a clunky interface just seems like it's a big problem, contributing to the lack of people's use of the math tutoring platforms that you were describing in the article.
And this is going to become crucial, Alexander. So I just wrapped up a story on AI tutoring
Okay.
for the British magazine Tess magazine. And so I got to play with all of these AI tutors. Some of them are humanistic. They are a human talking to you and talking you through content. And this issue of clunky interface and kind of like cringy elements as they try to develop these AI tutors. I'm telling you, I'm going to be so interested to see how like teenagers react to those tutors. There's a lot to be looked into because the companies seem to be rushing for AI tutoring.
Right. And even before you get to AI, it's amazing that in 10 or 15 years of software development, there doesn't seem to be a breakout success. There are lots of breakout successes outside of educational software, tools and platforms that kids love and feel native and intuitive to the kids, that are responsive, etc. But we don't seem to have one of those in the education world that you might want.
That's a story I want to read, Alexander. Is the big question is, do we need these tools?
Right.
How do we know? You know, like I think that is a great question that needs to be answered.
Who's a who's the big kid on the block when it comes to ed tech software? I used to hear the name Amplify. I'm hearing IXL and Zern. Is there anyone who dominates the market? If we were going to be the imaginary assigning editors, assigning the story that we'd like to do or someone to do, where would where would we send them to give parents and educators a representative understanding?
Well, I'm going to tell you this without knowing the exact numbers. Okay. So I'm going to say what my perception is
Yeah.
that the big ones are iReady and Curriculum Associates and IXL. Those are the ones that appear to be, according to their own numbers, in the
Mhm.
most classrooms. It's millions and millions of students it's in all 50 states, and both handle both reading and math, which isn't true of all the platforms. So those are the big ones.
And so we'd be sending a reporter or teams of reporters in to see how these programs are being used in the classroom in real life, what the experience is, what the results are, etc.
And also what the professional development is, you know. So in my ednext story, I got to talk to curriculum associates about this, and you know, they know that there are issues with the platform. One of them is getting students to use it,
Right,
and you know, so and also how teachers are trained. They are spending a lot of money to train teachers to use it in these certain ways,
right,
and it kind of looks like maybe they aren't doing it. They aren't using them in those certain ways. So
right. The In the meantime, while we're waiting for these traditionally reported stories to emerge, to get reported, it takes some time and vision to pull these things off. Um, who's filling the void? You are to some extent. I don't know if Audrey Water is still around, writing things with her sharp and critical eye. Who who are the iReady and IXL of non-traditional or independent journalism covering this story?
Yeah, I mean, I think Karen Vates and the Curriculum Insight Project would be like at the top of who I am reading about this now, that she is really on it. She wants to understand um what is happening with iReady. She is has a kind of like pipeline to a lot of educators who are sharing with her how it's being used, what they think is bad about it. So it's like if you're looking for alternative media on Substack, she is definitely on it.
On this topic. And
Mhm.
is there a Jonathan Haidt? Is there a advocate, a leading advocate from an academic background, which I understand Haidt comes from, or a parent background? Is there a person who has become the ceremonial leader of this, hey, wait a minute movement?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unclear, but it looks like that in the Substack world that it's Corny, Jared Cooney Horvath. I have such a hard time saying his name because he's an academic, he's a neuroscientist, he's just written a book about instructional digital software and about screen time. So I would say he's definitely got a growing following. He's got a lot of shares on Instagram for a reel. He gave some testimony to Congress
Right.
about instructional digital practice. Yeah.
Right. I saw that. Um, do you think that when the dust settles, do you think that, or do you speculate or hope, worry? Do you think that things are going to get rolled back substantially? Or do you think that the rollback movement is going to peter out? What's your sense of what happens?
My sense is there are going to be big changes in elementary school. That's what I think.
Okay.
I think that parents are mad, teachers also are very sympathetic, and school leaders are sympathetic to these because they see a lot of problems with kids on screen time. You know, so many teachers and school leaders are saying that their kids don't try as much anymore. Their concentration is very low. So I think they're on board, and I think they're going to stick to it. And so elementary school, yes. Middle and high school, I think it's very unclear. And honestly, that's a story I would like to see too. Is somebody rolling back, or are they going back to textbooks and pencil and paper in an 8th grade classroom, in a 10th grade classroom,
Right.
after years of using laptops? And what does that look like?
Right. I had the chance to talk to the Kansas middle school principal who uh, got one-to-one Chromebook books out of her school. And I was actually a little bit surprised and impressed that it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. I asked her what the ingredients were, because I would imagine that if you tried to do this in most middle schools or high schools, you'd get a lot of pushback. Um, she said that they had already gotten rid of personal devices and had seen the benefits of that. And so the idea of we don't have to do everything that someone might tell us we have to do was clear to the kids and parents and educators. And they had a curriculum that included both online and paper and pencil workbooks.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So it wasn't like landing the airplane in the middle of the highway halfway through the flight. So they had an alternative. And the other thing that she said, and I didn't get to ask her enough about this, she said also that they'd had a short-lived experience with a platform called Summit that I'm not super familiar with. But she said that they'd had this experience. I think Summit tried to be soup to nuts, everything kind of platform. They did it from 2018 to 2020 and then stopped. And she said that that experience of trying to do everything online, both the teachers and the kids, um, uh, wasn't successful. They ceased it, and that helped the teachers and the parents and the kids understand that not all ed software is successful, and that this idea of one platform to rule them all wasn't necessarily going to be, but it would be hard to do, no doubt about it. And I worry that people are going to make a lot of noise and not do a lot of reconsideration. That would be my worry.
Definitely. It's a very American thing to do in education is to do it all 100%, make everything digital, and then reverse
Right.
and then make 0%
Right.
digital.
Right. A couple more questions, and thank you so much for doing this. And I want to send everyone to your Substack, the Bell Ringer, which also includes a podcast.
Yeah.
It's great stuff. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Has the issue of ed tech or digital software, I'm still scrambling for the right term, has it gotten political yet? Are there political players? I know we've got Hugh Grant involved now, but has this become a red or a blue issue? Has it become a national organization level issue yet, or are people holding off?
Yeah, it sounds like to some extent people are holding off, but there have been what I find really interesting is that there are people from both sides of the aisle who have become interested in changing the amount of screen time
Mhm.
students get. You know, I think it was Ted Cruz who organized that hearing with Jared Cooney Horvath. So I think he was very concerned about screen times in classrooms, and then there was a bill introduced in the Iowa legislature that was sponsored by Moms for Liberty and the Iowa State Teachers Union. They had come together for the
Huh.
first time, you know, like unheard of in American politics,
Yeah, yeah.
to both of them to push back on screen time. So what I think is interesting about this story is so far how unilateral the pushback is.
How interesting. Last question. iReady, the folks at iReady have definitely been having their turn in the barrel, right? Everyone gets one. Some of us get more than one, but
That's right. That's
they're,
right.
they're under a lot of scrutiny right now. What's your sense of the fairness or completeness or accuracy of the iReady
Yeah. I
barrel time that's happening right now? Is
yeah.
iReady particularly worse than anyone else?
That's very hard to tell. I couldn't land on either side of it. From my understanding of iReady, it has some pluses, right? In that if a student is motivated and a student is already pretty proficient in math, let's say,
Right.
that the extra practice time does help them, and it does help them solidify, you know, those concepts into long-term memory. So, but it has some issues. It doesn't break out for teachers which skills students are getting wrong. It kind of gives them like a glossed over, very generalized. And so teachers say that's a problem. You know, it has these algorithm issues where it punishes kids who take a long time to answer questions, and it makes the kids extremely frustrated. The thing is, I talked to iReady, you know, to curriculum associates about some of these issues, and they're super aware of them and kind of working on them. So I think it kind of like we return back to this question of, you know, do these platforms help kids learn, and when and why, and are there some better alternatives? One thing that I want to point out is that Delta Math and Assessments and these digital math practice apps that teachers and parents and kids seem to really like,
Right.
they aren't huge. They're boutique. They don't have big marketing departments. They don't have you know, a lot of this might be that we could actually get better screen time if
Mhm.
districts and schools started kind of like asking better questions about what they're using and looking for better alternatives to see if they exist.
Does anyone rate the effectiveness or appropriateness of educational software?
Not to my knowledge. And if you are rating it, please contact me. I'm at holly@hollykorbey.com because I would love to see that. I think that that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to see that as well. Holly, thanks for coming on and telling me everything I needed to know and sharing your hopes for the future. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Holly Korbey from the Bell Ringer. Bye for now.